Karl Marx. His name echoes through history, sometimes hurled as an insult, other times used to describe any idea that feels a bit too rigid or unconventional. Some see him as a dangerous figure, while others hail him as a brilliant thinker. But the real question is, do we truly grasp his core ideas, or just the popular, often oversimplified image of him? Various sources, from analyses of his seminal work Das Kapital to more digestible articles, reveal that the Marx people often talk about might be quite different from the Marx who focused on other distinct aspects. It might surprise you to learn that Marx, according to these sources, dedicated far more of his time and energy to analyzing and critiquing capitalism than to meticulously outlining what a communist society should look like. His most famous book, Das Kapital, which he didn't even complete before his death, was fundamentally an attempt to dissect capitalism itself, not a how-to guide for communism. The book kicks off with a seemingly simple yet incredibly complex question: where does profit come from? At first glance, the answer seems easy. Capitalists buy raw materials, workers produce goods, and the finished product sells for more. Problem solved, right? Not so fast. Marx digs deeper, posing that if the entire economy is simply an exchange of equal values, meaning everyone gets precisely the value they put in, then where do all these extra funds, these profits, actually originate? It implies that someone must be paying more than the real value, or someone is receiving less. This is where the concept of surplus value comes into play. Sources simplify it like this: a worker earns a wage that's supposed to cover their basic living expenses and support their family. This wage represents the value of a certain number of hours of their labor, let's say 8 hours. However, the worker, through their ability to work and produce, creates more value in their workday than the value of those 8 hours. They might produce the equivalent of 10 hours of labor, for instance. That difference, those 2 extra hours, the value generated in those 2 hours is the surplus value, and it's what goes to the capitalist as profit. Marx saw this as the fundamental mechanism through which capital grows and accumulates, far beyond simple buying and selling at a higher price. It's about extracting value from the labor itself. But Marx's critique didn't stop at money. He delved deeper into another crucial point: alienation. What exactly does alienation mean in this context? Readings explain that work in a capitalist system, especially with excessive specialization and division of labor, can make workers feel disconnected. They might be disconnected from the product they're creating with their own hands, perhaps only making a tiny part of it without seeing the full picture. Think of someone on an assembly line. They can also be alienated from the work process itself, which can be repetitive and unfulfilling, offering no creative outlet. Even worse, they can become alienated from themselves, their humanity, and their true potential, as work becomes merely a means to survive rather than something intrinsically meaningful. This resonates with how many people feel today, like a cog in a machine, or even those in the gig economy who feel their time is dictated by an app. This leads us to a third point in his critique: instability. Are we talking about economic crises? Exactly. Marx observed that capitalism inherently experiences cyclical crises. What's fascinating is that he described them as crises of abundance. How can that be? He meant that these weren't crises caused by a lack of food or goods, as was common in the past. Instead, they occur when we're capable of producing far more than we need. We produce in excess. Factories might shut down, people lose their jobs, and despite this abundance, many suffer, a strange paradox. This, of course, fuels the constant anxiety of losing one's job at any moment due to new technology or cost cutting. It's a pervasive sense of insecurity, and Marx saw all these elements as interconnected. To arrive at these profound analyses, Marx needed a foundational philosophical approach. What was it? This brings us to his methodology, known as historical materialism. Sources state that he flipped Hegel's philosophy. How so? Hegel argued that ideas and consciousness shape material reality. Marx, however, asserted the complete opposite. He said that society's material and economic conditions, which he called the base, are what shape everything else. Our ideas, culture, laws, and politics, which he termed the superstructure. In essence, the economy is the foundation upon which everything else in society is built. This is a simplification, but it's the core idea. Even our way of thinking about things is influenced by this, such as the concept of commodity fetishism, where we begin to see a commodity as having a magical value in itself, forgetting the network of human relationships and labor that produced it. Relationships between people transform into relationships between objects we buy and sell. Now, back to communism. The common perception is that Marx laid out a detailed plan and specifics. What do the sources say? The sources are very clear on this point. Marx did not provide a catalog or a ready-made roadmap for communism. For him, communism was closer to a real-world movement aimed at transforming the existing situation based on its internal contradictions, not an idealistic utopia ready for precise application. So, no detailed description of the future? No. The core idea was that the workers, the producers, should own and manage the means of production themselves, not necessarily the state controlling everything. The specifics were left to historical circumstances and the evolving consciousness of the working class in each society. Even the famous slogan, "From each according to his ability to each according to his needs," was his vision for a very advanced stage that might come in the distant future after productivity significantly increased and scarcity disappeared. It wasn't a program for immediate implementation. Thus, we can conclude that for Marx, the most important thing was analysis, understanding material reality in order to change it, not just presenting ideal conceptions. That's why we can say that his true strength lay in his diagnosis of how capitalism operates and the problems that can arise from it. I believe that's an accurate conclusion. His diagnosis of exploitation, alienation, and instability is the most powerful aspect of his thought. This prompts a final question for listeners to ponder. If we try to apply Marx's methodology, not his pre-packaged ideas, but his approach to analyzing material, economic, and technological conditions to our current era, what might be the most significant contradictions or major challenges we could uncover in the economic and technological system we live in today? A question open for thought.